Good morning, friends. Before we, the sound might take a minute to readjust now. Before we start talking about this reading specifically, I just have to stop and have a moment of appreciation for everything that has happened up to this point. You know, this morning I ran into Shanti in the parking lot, and I'd been talking to her last night and this morning and saying, I couldn't quite find my feet with where I wanted to go with this topic today. You know, this is one of those topics that, Yogananda said, God is simple, everything else is complex. And you can take this into a really esoteric, intellectual discussion, or we can just talk about how it's simply telling us what every reading and every scripture and every great master is telling us: love God more, love God with all your heart. And so I was just sharing with Shanti when I ran into her in the parking lot this morning that I was just feeling a little ungrounded, and I wasn't sure where to go today. And that's not like me. I like to be prepared. I like outlines. I like organization. And in her great wisdom, because what the mind would like to do in a moment like that is spend every spare second you have up until this moment right here planning and prepping and making sure you're ready to go. And she said, just relax and just ride the inspiration that happens through the chanting, through the meditation, through everything. And so I really just sat in appreciation of everything that's been happening up until this point. And when we come here week after week and we experience this, it can become part of the routine for us. But to have that opportunity today to really listen to the chants, I was so grateful for that second chant. I have been roaming. I was thinking, there's nothing else that needs to be said in the wake of this reading and what it means to really understand that truth invites, it never demands, than the words of that chant. I have been roaming, forsaken by thee. Now I'm not going to be able to do it unless I sing it. Evermore moving, someone help me. Yeah, that's the second line, isn't it? Through thy vast, unthrobbing heart, which I was really getting stuck on that part. I'll spare you all my singing, but we understand the essence of it. And really, I was just feeling, and I almost wanted to, if I were a more courageous person, I would say to our chanters, come up, let's chant for 10 minutes and just be done, because everything that we are longing to experience, the longing, the joy, the confidence in knowing that God is ours already, it's right there in that chant. Now I'm really going to try. I have been roaming, forsaken by thee. Thank you. You have seen me groping, hardly ever answering. Then I have been roaming, bursting all boundaries apart. Then that beautiful line, evermore moving toward thee, to thy vast, unthrobbing hearts. And then the beautiful melody that wafts us up through endless incarnations. I've called out for thy name. That is the essence of truth. That's what we're speaking to here. And this reading, truth invites, it never demands. It's actually a little bit bittersweet for us on one hand, because we know exactly where we want to go. We know exactly what the goal is for each one of us. And yet we have all the time in the world to get there. And Divine Mother just lovingly holds us and waits for us until we're ready to accept and to grasp that truth. But to hold that reality that the goal is known, what it is that we want. Truth is something that is never changing. And yet the way it manifests for us in our lives, it can be confusing, because truth is all over the place, like a storm on the sea. This is why Yogananda gives us this beautiful metaphor of the ocean, and that the level of the ocean never changes, no matter how dramatic the waves are of the sea. And I love ships, and I love shipwrecks, and I love sailing novels and movies. I'm reading a book right now called In the Heart of the Sea, which is about the sinking of the Essex, which was a whaling ship in the 1800s that inspired the novel Moby Dick, which many of you know is a dear, dear novel in my life. And I've just been enjoying the ride. And yesterday, as I was listening to it in my car, it was so dramatic what's happening in this story that I forgot that it was real, because I thought that it was a story, and I thought the characters were just a part of this journey where whales are crashing into the ship and the ships are sinking and they're starving and they're looking and there's just striving. There was so much drama in it, and I was so caught up in it when I was driving in the car yesterday on my way home that I forgot for a moment that this is actually a true story. This is a historian who's taken records and journals, and it reminded me just how dramatic life is and how confusing sometimes that can be, because it's whirling around us and swirling around us like the storms of the sea. And yet the level of the ocean never changes if we take global warming out, right? The level of the ocean never actually changes because truth is one and eternal. I was sitting with that as I was listening to Shantala reading it. And I heard it differently this morning. This is a call to action. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Every week we are charged to remember who we truly are, to remember what truth we are seeking. And the discord comes because delusion is right there just coaxing us deeper and deeper in all of her myriad of ways that Maya has to do that for us. But what is delusion? No matter how it manifests, no matter how dramatic it may seem to us, delusion is simply that pull or that conscious force of energy that's trying to remind you or trying to, what's the word? Not remind you, that's the wrong word. Trying to persuade you that you are separate from the divine. And what is truth? Truth is that wave of conscious energy that's trying to remind you that you are not separate from God. And we're caught in the pull back and forth like the waves of the ocean, up and down and up and down. But underneath it is the quiet pull coaxing us deeper and deeper to know who we truly are. And it's our level of consciousness that helps us to tap into that truth. The truth remains. The truth is always drawing us up. I was listening to a talk by Morley, who many of you met when he was here just a few weeks ago, last night, and it was on a different topic, but of course these topics sing with each other and in a beautiful harmony. And he was telling a joke, this actually happened to him in his real life. He is a computer science major, and so in college he'd studied computer science, and this was back in the 90s, and he was talking about how the very first iteration of AI, which is huge in our world now today, was being tested back in the 90s, and he said that one of the first programs that someone wrote was a program where they wanted to take a phrase in English, translate it to Russian, then take that Russian translated phrase, and to check it, translate it back into English, just to make sure that the system actually works. And so the quote that they chose was a quote from the Bible: "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And so they translated into, this was in his textbook, they translated it into Russian. Obviously, the scientist or the computer engineer couldn't understand the Russian. Then he plugs the Russian in, translate it back to English, and what came back? The vodka was bad, but the vodka was good, but the meat was bad. Isn't that funny? And if you think about it, that's truth. That's a literal translation. You know, it's just so funny. And that's the level if we take AI, but if we translate that back into our lives, that's the root of it. We plug into truth where we can access it. And the whole of the spiritual path, I know, it's funny, isn't it? I kept thinking this morning, am I really going to share that joke? But I couldn't help it. It was too funny. You know, but really that's the essence of the point. Truth exists where we can access it. And so the whole of our spiritual path, the whole of our truth seeking is to raise our consciousness with as much effort and joy and willingness as we can to meet truth where it actually lives. And it's not a linear path. We wish that it were sort of a checklist where you could just climb that ladder, but we climb a little and then we slide back down and then we climb a little and we slide back down, because that's the very nature of life. That's exactly what, Sri Yukteswar, Shanti was giving a Q&A yesterday, and she was quoting this line from Sri Yukteswar, which many of us will know. "Forget the past, the vanished lives of all men are dark with many shames." And then that next line, I wrote it down in case I couldn't remember, unless anyone can pull it up. That's the line I really want. There's a line that comes right before everything will improve. That's the one I really wanted to hold on to. Human conduct is ever unreliable until it is anchored in the divine. That's the one that we always forget, but how powerful. Human conduct is ever unreliable until it is anchored in the divine. We're always going to be climbing the ladder and sliding back down. Did any of you play Chutes and Ladders when you were a little kid? You climb up and then you have to slide back down and then climb back up. That's what the spiritual path looks like. But when we do it with willingness and with joy and with effortful desire to know God, when we are anchored in the divine, that's the balloon that just consciously lifts us up higher and higher. And the beautiful thing for everybody sitting in this room and everybody watching this talk online is that on some level, somewhere, we've already plugged into that truth. We already have access to it. And once you're plugged in, you can never actually let it go. That connection is always there. The divine is always watching you. This is what Babaji says to Lahiri Mahashaya when he awakens him in the caves above or in the Himalayan foothills. And he says, ever was I with you, watching you when you were a young boy in the sands, when you were striving as a young man at work. I had never forgotten you. You may have forgotten me, but I've never forgotten you. And so when I was thinking about how to approach this topic today, what kept coming to my mind was, what do we do in that in-between? Here is where we are, and we know where we want to go, and we're spiritual seekers striving toward that truth. So what does that truth look like? How do we get there? How do we actually raise our consciousness? And of course, we know all of the ways that Yogananda has given us to plug into that through our techniques, through everything. And this is where I never finished that thought. This is usually what happens. But I was so touched by the wake of everything that happened this morning and just the precision with which Swami Kriyananda and so many people designed this Sunday worship service, how we begin with chanting to open the heart, then we meditate to still the heart, to still that energy and lift it up to the divine. Then we use the power of affirmation to concentrate our forces of energy and to direct them toward the goal. And then we sing for joy. It's just so beautiful, the way that it's layered together. And it's these little things, day in and day out, that help us to remember the one simple truth. God is simple, everything else is complex. Just love God. How do we open our heart and love God more? And I wanted to share 3 stories. I might end up sharing only 2, but I wanted to quote Sri Yukteswar and say, I'd like to share 3 stories, each with a lesson, to help us to get there. And the first one, for those of you that don't know, read Autobiography of a Yogi and you'll find that quote. And you'll know exactly what we're speaking to. But to share, Yogananda's guru was Swami Sri Yukteswar, and one day when he was still a young boy, he asked Swami Sri Yukteswar to share a story about his life. And Sri Yukteswar, who was a self-realized master and really the epitome of both austerity and love, it's beautiful to take those 2 paradoxical things and show how they can really come together. He said, okay, I'll share about my life, and I'll share 3 stories, each with a lesson, because there was no need to share about himself. He was just sharing the teachings. And so these 3 stories that came to mind, the first one actually happened yesterday. Shantala and I were here for our family service, which we have once a month. And we pick a topic every week and every month. And yesterday we decided to talk about the guru, to talk about what it means to have a teacher, to learn from a teacher, to strive for challenges that are bigger than we can tackle, and tune into the help of a guide to help us to get there. And it was very fun. You can ask her after service. This is Shantala here if you don't know her. She had amazing, fun, wonderful physics experiments that we did, puzzles that were difficult to solve. I could not solve them. I needed her help. I needed the teacher to help, and the kids loved it. And they got to dive into it and really learn what it means to tune into a teacher and to get help. And I said, do you want to find a story? And she shared the story of Eklava from the Mahabharata, which I hadn't heard in a very long time. So even when she told me, I said, I don't know that story, but I did as soon as she shared it. And this is the first story I'd like to share with us for how we climb that ladder. And so Eklava was a young man, and he was a hunter in the forest. And he was born to poor farmers and poor hunters. And there were many leopards and deer in the forest, and he wanted to become a great hunter, a great archer, in order to protect the deer in the forest. And so he starts to begin to learn and to research, and he learns of Dronacharya, who is the greatest guru, the greatest archery teacher in the land. And he calls on Dronacharya, and he asks Dronacharya to start to teach him how to do archery and how to become a great archer so that he can protect the deer in the forest. And Dronacharya is the archer, the archery teacher for the Kuru, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, for the kingdom. And so he says, I cannot teach you archery because he can't teach anyone outside of the kingdom, and here's a poor farmer in the forest. And so this young man, Eklava, says, okay. And he goes back into the forest and he builds a stone statue of Drona. And he puts the stone statue right in the space where he begins to practice. And every single day he's practicing his archery more and more and more. And he's getting more precise and more talented and more tuned in, all the time tuning into this stone idol of his guru who he is pulling and drawing that energy from. And then, of course, what begins to happen? But he becomes one of the greatest archers in the land. And Arjuna finds out that there's an archer student, or that there's an archer out in the forest who's rumored to be better than him, who is, of course, the greatest archer in the land. So he goes and he finds this young man and he says, who was your teacher? And he says, Drona was my teacher. And Arjuna gets very upset because he knows Drona's not supposed to teach anyone outside of the kingdom. And so he comes back to Drona and he says, how could you teach this young man? You're our teacher. And Drona, confused as he would be, goes into the forest and meets this young man, Eklava, and he sees this statue. And he says, who taught you? And he said, well, you have taught me. You are my guru. Everything that I have learned, I've learned through you. And then the end of the story, this is very sweet. We'll come back to the point. Shantala was telling this story to 5- and 6-year-olds yesterday. Of course, the point being, how do we draw our energy from the guru? And that it's our ability, our willingness to be open and receptive, that the guru's energy is always there. And if we begin to draw on it, that we can begin to transform. But the end of the story is that Drona tells Eklava that he needs to pay penance back for all that he has learned. And what Dronacharya asks him to do is cut off his right thumb. And without a second thought, Eklava does it. And of course, he becomes memorialized through this act. He's no longer a great archer because you need your thumb to be a great archer, but he becomes memorialized as an example of what discipleship, willing discipleship, looks like. And so at the end of the story, she's telling this and she's saying, what did we learn? And these little kids are going, what happened to his thumb? Was there blood? But it was very sweet. They were just so caught up in this one moment. And we kept trying to get them to see the lesson. So here today, we get to come full circle and really share the essence of that lesson, right? It was very sweet. At the end, then she was getting into some experiments, and I said, so sometimes we have challenges that are really difficult, and we need a guru to help us. And I said, so Shantala is going to be our guru today and show us. And little Juno, who's not here today, goes, is she going to cut off her thumb? It's very sweet. But for each one of us, luckily Divine Mother isn't asking us to cut off our thumb. The guru's asking us to tune in. The guru's asking us to draw our energy, to open our heart in receptivity and to tune into the power of the guru. This is the example of Eklava, that example of unwavering discipleship that was present there. His guru, his teacher, he was able to draw all of that energy, all of that power by tuning into the idol, by tuning into his own willpower. And it's not that our willpower is what's going to take us to God, but when our willpower is married with a true teacher, a teacher who knows truth, just like that call to action that comes to us every Sunday. It really struck me today because I think I was thinking about this topic. Truth invites, it never commands. That every week we are called to action. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. What are we doing moment by moment, day by day? When our discipleship is tested, when it looks as though our guru has turned away from us. I was reading a few stories about Eklava last night because the beauty of these myths is that when you tune into different stories, they're just slightly different. And that's what one of the stories that I was reading, the writer was saying, it can feel that Dronacharya was cruel in asking him to sacrifice his thumb and give up the skill of archery, but instead what he did is memorialized him as an example of who each one of us as truth seekers is striving to be. The truth is there. The Guru never left him. The Guru was always with him. And the storms of the sea may look tumultuous, but truth, the Guru, the light of God, is always calling us up. It's always drawing us higher and higher. All we have to do is have the courage not to turn away, which is the second story that I'll share. As many of you know, Kashama and I spent about 2 weeks. She spent about 3 weeks. I spent about 2 weeks in India this summer. And we went to Kolkata and Varanasi and Puri and a lot of the places where our masters, our gurus, lived and served. And one of the places that we went in Kolkata was the temple Dakshineshwar, which many of you will know from stories, or maybe you've been there yourself. And my relationship with Dakshineshwar has mostly come through my friend Sai Ganesh, who's shared stories about it all along the way. And we have this beautiful story, an autobiography of a yogi, where Yogananda is meditating in front of the statue of Ma Kali, and she comes to life and she comes to him. And so when I was going, I was just holding some of these stories in my mind, but I'd been given many little tiny cards. Most of the pictures of Ma Kali in this statue are about this big, and she's always very ornately decorated. And I could never really see her and feel her because the picture is so little and there's so many garlands around her that my own personal resonance, I didn't really know what to expect. But I wasn't going in expecting it to be a very deeply profound experience because I hadn't resonated with these images before. And so we woke up and we went early in the morning one day. And first you wait in line and you get to have darshan just right in front of her. And it's always a little chaotic for those of you that have been to Hindu temples, right there in front of the statue, and people are offering prasad, and people are just, there's so much energy being given to the statue, and you get just a few seconds and then you're sort of ushered away or wafted off, and the next person comes in. But then you can walk back just about maybe 100 feet or so, and there's what's called the Hall of Pillars. And this is where Yogananda sat meditating. And so Kshama and I sat down and we spent about an hour there meditating. And I couldn't sit because she was probably about as far away as I am right now from the end of the temple. And there were so many people in front of her that you could just get these tiny little glimpses of her. She would be there for a moment, then someone would come and cover her up, and then someone else would come and she'd reveal herself again and get covered up again. But the experience that I had when I was looking at the statue was that I would never be able to turn away of my own volition. She was so beautiful and she was so magnetic and her eyes were so intense that there was no way I would be able to look away from her. And so it was always divine grace that eventually someone would just kind of come in front of her. And I knew at one point that we needed to leave this spot lest we die here, which maybe wouldn't be so bad if Ma wanted to take us home. But I would remember looking at her, and I said, okay, if we have to leave, then just cover yourself again. And of course, then someone walks in front, and I just stepped away like this. And I said to Kashama, the next morning, we didn't have plans to go back. And I said, we have to go back. Let's go again. And so we went back the next morning, and I had a similar experience, the same thing. And that was much different because when we went early the next morning, there was maybe 20 people in the whole of the temple area and the whole space, and they hadn't even woken Ma up yet, so you couldn't even go up to see her, but they were doing a puja, and people were chanting to her and just offering flowers on her, and she was just beaming, and the same thing happened. I couldn't turn away of my own volition. It wasn't a choice. I would have stayed there for the rest of my life. Of course, again, the prayer came because I knew I had to leave at some point. Just cover yourself so that I can turn away. And I share this story because this is the second lesson that we all get to carry with us. Never turn away from Divine Mother. She's right there and she's drawing us and she's calling us and coaxing us. Truth invites, it never commands. Truth is always there. It's whispering to you through chants, through meditations, through everything that we do, through her love. All we have to do is quietly love Divine Mother. And in the wake of that, the rose petals, the flowers, the melodies of her song are revealed to us moment by moment. It doesn't mean that our lives become soft and peaceful and quiet. The tumult of the sea is constantly swirling around us, but the level of the sea never changes. Our hearts are quieted and they're stilled if we just choose to never look away from her. And we can do that in our own hearts, because where was I really looking? Yes, I was looking at an idol that for decades people have been pouring their energy and their attention and their joy into. And yes, there's magnetism to that idol, but where are we truly looking? We're looking back at our own hearts. Divine Mother is resting right here for each one of us. Truth rests right here for each one of us. If we just have the courage, the strength, the desire, the willingness to never stop moving toward her. Now I'm going to lose it again. Ever bursting all boundaries of heart, ever more moving toward thee, to thy vast, unthrobbing heart. I butchered that a little, but you guys know exactly what we're speaking to here. Never stop moving toward Divine Mother. We can use another chant that I know better. Receive me on thy lap, O Mother. Cast me not at death's door. Receive me on thy lap, O Mother. Cast me not at delusion's door. What is delusion but the incorrect assumption or the incorrect belief that we are separate from the divine? However vast and dramatic it's playing out in our lives, it has one goal: to try and convince you that you are separate from Divine Mother. And we are the lucky ones, because we know that that's not true, no matter how difficult or tumultuous the storms may be. God bless you.
There lived by the banks of a stream a hermit whose prayers chose applause for their theme. He gazed at the flowers and he smiled at the sun. Then he clapped with delight. Lord, he cried, oh, well done. Well done, Lord, oh, very well done. The mountains that laugh with the gypsy crowds. Smile to welcome the sun. All nature sings praises aloud. The fields smile to welcome the sun. All nature sings praises aloud. The trees dance to show their elation. A day on love's earth has begun. And every true heart in creation in speechless wonder is found. And every true heart in creation in speechless wonder is found. Well done, Lord, oh, very well done. The joy that you planted in children's hearts, the thrill known in bearing a son, the hope when a child departs. Like the sun, all life seems to leap like a dancer. When gazing I see only thee. All life seems to leap like a dancer.
See